You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. Our guest today is Ben Stimpson. Ben is the author of Ancestral Whispers, a guide to building ancestral veneration practices, which we'll be focusing on today. They're also a therapist, lecturer, student, and spiritual director, and podcaster. But there is something about Ben I don't even think they're aware of. Ben is the only person who I have ever invited to Fika without reading their book first. It is a rule of mine to read all, or in a rushed case, enough of a work to know if I'm going to like myself for sharing it. If I'm passionate about it, even better. Ben had commented on Fika, and since I learned that they were an author, I was curious, so I looked them up. Ancestral Whispers wasn't out yet, so I couldn't read it. But that voice inside me said, "Invite Ben." And knowing that the work was published by Llewellyn and would definitely have some editing, I took a chance, and it was a chance worth taking. Ancestral Whispers is a fantastic book with fantastic information and suggestions, and left me with a fantastic attitude ready to use them. I couldn't be happier with myself for extending this invitation, and I couldn't be happier that this author has joined the writing world, and I hope to see more of their work in the future. Thank you for Ancestral Whispers, Ben, and welcome to Fika.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is a joy, and since you invited me so many months ago, we're finally here, and I'm so excited to be here.
I know, it seems like it was at that point, that was the furthest invitation I had ever really extended, like in time wise, right? Now I have things booked for February already, but it was my very first, so it has seemed like forever for this interview to get,
we're all different people now. It's been a long journey.
I think we are. It was the summer. I'm like, is the summer over already? Yes, indeed, it almost is. And that's important for us in Canada. The summer.
It's true. Yeah.
So, Ben, I've read this book, and one thing struck me. Many things struck me from the book. But as I was reading, and I need to know, is it true that the only reason you don't pick food up from the floor to eat it is because it belongs to the ancestors?
One of many reasons.
Okay, yes, I figured that.
Yes, we will get more into all of that piece in a bit, but yeah, one of many reasons.
You didn't point that out in the book, though. So as a mom, and as I'm reading it, I'm going, man, there's other reasons. There's other reasons.
I know.
So one of this, in working with the ancestors, we are essentially working with the dead. I mean, that's kind of difficult for a lot of people to get into. There's a lot involved in this. Now, what you say is that veneration is not grieving. It comes after the grieving process. Or I'm reading this and I'm thinking it could almost speed the grieving process, or if you're jumping right into veneration, there's no actual loss there if you see it in a certain way, right? This is what I got
it's absolutely, it's an interesting thing. So for those listeners who are more into the nonfiction world, so my book is around a spiritual practice that in the West we actually have we've been dancing around for many decades now. There's been an interest. There's been a social interest via the movie like Coco, for example, beautiful Pixar movie Coco. There's an interest in how other cultures work with the dead and conceptualize the dead and relate to the dead. But we're so caught up in our Western individualism that oftentimes the only traditions that we have available to us are grief traditions. And I think oftentimes because of the way that society in the whole of the Western world, whether it be New Zealand, Australia, certain parts of Europe, North America, right? We have this weird relationship with death where we don't actually really understand it socially. We just, when somebody dies, socially we see it as a loss, and then we have this void that's just existing around our social spheres where that person used to be. Even the way we talk about the dead, we've lost them, they've passed away, and we don't talk about them anymore in the present tense. We talk about them in the past tense. Now, when you look around the world at different cultures, as I did through writing Ancestral Whispers,
Good, he's got the book there.
I've got the book here. It's part of that professionalism piece. You tend to see different cultures talking about the dead in the present tense, not the past tense anymore, right? You tend to see the dead as being in the same spaces with us, in the same world as us, but separated by a veil, by they're existing in a parallel spiritual world, whatever it is, right? You go to Chinatown during the new moon festivals, or through or go to Mexico during the Day of the Dead celebrations. The dead are living here, they're existing here, they're it's no longer a state of being that they're in. It's just a kind of a transitionary point. They're dead, they've died, they're now in that other space, but that other space is still connected to us. So I feel like with the focus on the dead, we so often culturally only think of grief. But grief is just that understanding and acceptance of somebody else's transformation into something else. And oftentimes grief is more about our own eventual death than it is about necessarily somebody else's. It makes us uncomfortable that we're going to die because we don't want to be forgotten in the same way that society forgets all of these other people. Right?
It's a reminder that we're not going to be the center all the time. And it's almost like we're lacking in North America a sense of maturing throughout our ages. I'm not just saying North America, but I'm saying anywhere that has this, I love you, North America, absolutely. I live here.
Yes.
But that we have a lack of maturing about giving up that center stage.
It's true. It's true. And so what does that causes so many issues in people. Like you go down to California particularly, and you go to those transhumanist conventions where it's that idea of like uploading yourself to the cloud so that you cheat death. You go to these like health expos where the focus is so much on extending your life to the extent that you're not enjoying your life, right? I mean, I'm sure some people really love some of those supplements, but they look really, really horrific to me. But it's that piece about we're so focused on living. And when you look at, like, for example, that whole debate about MAID, for example, not to get too political here, but it's that idea of, what is being privileged? Longevity or experience, right? If you're living a life but it's not worth living,
that's just it. So they could be extending their life through relationships, through giving, philanthropy, whatever. But this is how, because it's not about the experience. It's not about making connections. It's about the image. I mean, no, that's a whole nother show, Ben. You need to come back. We need to talk about image. It doesn't have to do with books. It doesn't have to do with anything. We will just be taking care of our need to talk.
Yes, exactly right. but so that mindset then is so imbued into Western culture because of individualism. This, I think, is what I've really come to. Individualism is connected with the idea of capitalism, which is connected to the idea of Protestantism. I'm not dumping on Protestant Christianity, but Protestantism is really the roots of it, right? You look at collectivist cultures, and that includes forms of Christianity like Catholicism, like Orthodoxy, right? any collectivist culture around the world, you have the idea of the community. The individual is part of the community. The focus then is on the community surviving and going on, because that community is going to continue to remember you, hold you in that place of position, and you become then part of the collective ancestral kind of flow. When you're in an individualist culture like our horrific North America, and I love North America, don't get me wrong, that's not, but
yeah, you have to be double
issues.
Careful because you have an accent.
Yeah.
See,
I know, right? And I'm also leaving North America next year, so I have to be very, very careful with that. But we do have a big problem in Western society, which is that individualism piece, right? Because when you grow up in a society that tells you that you need to do everything you can to excel, to succeed, to be, the center of the universe, then when you are thinking of, I'm not going to be here anymore, I'm going to die, that can throw us off into all sorts of things. We don't have that natural collectivist support, right?
See,
sorry, I know you have a list of questions. So
no. We can get back to my questions. I mean, I just have them in case. I didn't feel that there would be an in case, so we'll just go until we have to be quiet. Then we'll just pick another date to go again. But it is, like, for example, myself, when I say there are people that have problems with death, I don't, because it is a natural cycle of things, and I see it as the flowing, and people come in and they give us what we want. And also, I'm very tired, Ben, so a big long nap would work wonders for me. I don't need to be remembered as such, but it is a real big deal. And the adage is, what you can't live until you learn to die.
This is the thing.
And so when you say that it's the individualism is keeping them apart, they actually aren't living. They're so afraid of dying.
Yeah. This is the thing. And I think it's because, again, socially we see death as being a vacation away. Not even a vacation, it's just you're away. You're no longer in the world, you're gone, and then easily forgettable, you're easily dismissible, you just don't exist anymore. It's oblivion. Even if we have those kind of cultural understanding of going to heaven, going to paradise, whatever it is, it's so far removed. When you look at collectivist societies around the world, and ancestor work, ancestor veneration and ancestral spiritual practices often lie in parallel with major traditions, even in like Catholicism and Orthodoxy and Islam and Buddhism, these big, huge world religions. Often you have them nestled underneath. What that does is it invites death back into the home. If you have a shrine set up to your ancestors in the corner, and you're going to that shrine from when you're a real little kid, and you're introduced to your ancestors as a child, it becomes then a natural part of the relationship. You can trust that in your dying process, when you die, your descendants are going to come to an altar and think about you and give you flowers and give you offerings and all of these things. And so then it does take that edge off of grief. I think it changes the form of grief that collective societies experience. But everybody's grief process is different. And I think that's also another key piece too.
So, and that could be extension of the fact that we are living so far apart. I mean, grandpa aren't even in the house during their living years. It is a very wide space world that we hadn't seen before. So, and even in the days before, if someone were to take a ship to the new country or whatever, they would never speak to that person, but that would make them even closer. They would tell the tales more. That connection needs to be there, and and a lot of people have shrines or altars and they don't even realize it. They have, I use that, but you point that out, which is why I don't see this as a book about dying or death. I see it as hope and appreciation. And and do you want me to go about how this worked in my life? What you've written here
by
now?
all means. Yeah, I know when you emailed me about that piece, I was very, yes, please do. Talk about that.
Okay, so it's not a huge thing, people. It hasn't, it's life-changing for me. So while I was reading this book, and this book will make you think, which is why I love it for everybody out there, because you need to think and figure these things out. So I have decided I am the law. Okay, so I'm reading this book, and recently, because my husband has kidney disease, we are doing home dialysis. And because we're doing home dialysis, the equipment takes up a lot of room. So I had to move my kitchen. I didn't have to. I chose to move my kitchen table into the living room because that seemed to be the only place to put it. But not only is it in the living room, we're still adjusting to this. So it isn't really in a usable spot at this point in time. Right. And I found myself for the last month feeling disconnected, not being able to concentrate, making mistakes on emails. Like I just couldn't get with it. Something was wrong. And upon reading about this and thinking about it, I realized that most of my important, like my aunts that influenced me, or my grandmother telling me the stories, or having conversations with my father, not always good ones, sometimes very strong conversations, were at the kitchen table over a coffee. Right. And so inadvertently, or maybe because, sitting in the morning, having my coffee and staring out the window, I was communicating with them. I was thinking about them. Yeah. That was our space, and that was what was important. And I had been missing those conversations with them because just this one little fluke in life just made me not do that. So because of space, Ben, I'm going to do this no matter what you say, even though you're the expert. Because of space.
I'm not an expert.
No, I'm telling you, you're an expert. You sound like someone doing a documentary that I listen to all the time. So I'm just going to, you have the voice of, no, I'm just bugging you. I'll probably get in trouble for that too. The thing is that because I don't have the space, I have decided that if I have a certain tablecloth that I put on during those times, and I have certain, like, okay, a plaid thermos. I don't have the thing, but I would remember going on holidays in the morning, and then we got to a certain spot. My father would open up his thermos, and you could smell the coffee. You see, people, why Fika exists. Coffee is so
Coffee is amazing.
You would
drink a cup of tea.
You would smell the coffee. And so that brought good memories to me. So I'm going to see if I can get a plaid thermos. But the aunt who I think is the one that said, invite him. I feel like this was all planned by somebody outside of me. Lived in Northern Ontario, had many kids in a very small home. And I just remembered this morning, had her table in the living room so everyone would have a space. Used to make lemon pie whenever we visited because she knew it was my favorite. So I am going to get that table usable. I am going to make a lemon pie, and then I'm going to sit down and say thank you to my aunt. So that is what came out of this book. So,
Vicky, that's beautiful. I love
you.
That. I love that.
Because I can't keep making these fluky mistakes. I need help. But just by thinking of all of that, and I started thinking of, there needs to be more flow. And I had uncles that worked on the canal, like talk about going around obstacles.
The canal for those in the States. Yeah.
And so just things like that, it makes you think. It doesn't always have to be stuff, and it doesn't always have to be, we don't always have the space or the room. You got little kids running around, you don't want to put grandma's precious china out. Yeah. But yeah, so that's how I worked with it.
That is exactly what I'm hoping that people will get from the book, because what you just described there speaks to relationship, which I think shows up in this book like 478 times, right? What ancestral work is, what spirituality is it is all about relationship, whether you're relating to dead ancestors, whether you're relating to spirits, whether you're related to deities, whether you're relating to fictional characters, right? It's all about relationship. Your altar, your shrine then is that kitchen table. Mm-hmm. You're filling it with the pieces that your ancestors will know are associated to that relationship, and you're inviting them to the table. I love that so much.
I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize
People
the
do this,
significance
though.
of
Yeah.
yeah, we do things for a
Yeah.
reason. I know, Ben.
Mhm.
Don't lecture me. So but this is why I think this book is so important for people to take on, regardless of who you are, what you believe, what you first of all. So okay, one of the let's get back. One of the things, do we ever stay on track here on Fika? No, we don't. One of the things that you talk about is to take the time, this is big, and decide what you feel happens after you die. What you as an individual feel
Yes, it's
happens after you
very
die.
absolutely the structure. So the structure of the book was very intentional for me, and it's when I approached, like, this was written mostly for the neo-pagan spiritual community, but also for a lot of the therapy kind of clients that are interested in developing connection with self and whatnot. Oftentimes what happens when people are interested in spirituality or are starting to look at that inner journey pieces, they want to know, what can you do? What can we do? What do I do? Right? For me, what the doingness has to come with the beingness, and the beingness comes from that understanding of worldview, understanding what your actual beliefs are. Because if what you practice and the physicality of it, whatever that practice looks like, doesn't fit with the worldview, doesn't make sense to the worldview, then there's going to be a cognitive dissonance. This comes back to your very first question about picking up stuff from the floor, right? So if food that is dropped on the floor, apart from it being germs and all that, 5-second rule is good, but
Yes.
if my worldview is that I believe that the ancestors dwell on a physical level in the earth, then any food that I put down on the ground is going to be for them. I'm not going to put offerings up high if I offer food to them, because they wouldn't be able to get it to it. So then food placed on the ground intentionally becomes theirs. If I drop food, then it suddenly touches
in your
on
mind,
them.
it is theirs.
Right, exactly. So me picking that up, even 5-second rule, is blurring the boundaries of the worldview and blurring the boundaries of that right rules. So that was very intentional for me. Like, if you're starting to think of a spiritual practice, and really what it was about cultural appropriation, preventing cultural appropriation. Because if we go back to what we were saying before, you and your table with your lemon cake and your lemon pie and your coffee in that thermos, and you've got that, right? That becomes a communal space that everybody who's coming to the table knows what's going on here.
Exactly.
You've got all of the elements, right? So that physical practice becomes a form of communication. That's another thing I talk about in the book. So ritual practice has to be in line with understanding those elements, right? So then, worldview-wise, you have to then understand what do you actually believe in order to then be able to actually put together something that others will understand. And because you're connected to the ancestors, some of them anyways, through familiar lines, then you need to also be present to what they're understanding, what their beliefs are. So I think a lot of people who, again, are on a spiritual journey, they want to know what to do because doing is seen as more important. But really coming up here and figuring out, okay, well, what do I actually believe? That's then going to allow you to understand for yourself, okay, well, I can do this, I can do that. I can be intentional with my practice because I understand what the intention behind it is, as opposed to lighting smudge and saying some words that you don't understand.
And that they would never understand.
And that they would never understand, exactly, right?
Hello, Tamara. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tamara.
So this is so it's so important, and that cultural appropriation is not going to work for you in a spiritual sense either.
This is the thing. Yep.
And that's what people don't look at. And also, I know that you had a very healing, I think it's something that many of us go through at the beginning of any new faith. any new faith or any new, passion in life, whether it's politics or just a way of educating or whatever it is, we tend to want to throw the part of us before that away, which includes parents and that sometimes.
Often,
And
yeah.
friends and relatives,
Right.
and because you see how this was, it was oppressed. But this way of thinking, this way of going back to the ancestors, will not only keep relationships going, fuel new relationships, like back further, and we talk right back to primitive times, right?
Totally. And beyond, yes.
Yeah, and but it can also heal those relationships,
Yes.
even afterward. People like spend their whole lives feeling guilty, thinking I should have understood that. And you have those same experiences as well that you shared in the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, for me, the book was not just an academic kind of intrigue for me. The book really came because I had gone through the past 5 years before that a great deal of personal therapy. During that time, I was training in psychotherapy. I was to become a therapist, and I was also involved in several spiritual traditions where ancestor work is such a foundational piece. And at that point in my life, I was in a place of anger. I was in a place of shame. I was in a place of I didn't really see the future for myself as being a good place, and so I latched on to the past. I came to realize along that journey that moving to Canada as a kid was one of the worst things that ever happened to me, and it wasn't an intentionally thing done to me. Like there was no intention to hurt me.
What happened in life?
It was just what happened in life. But my reaction to what had happened, because I came over from North Wales, where I'm from. I was 8.5 years old. I came over here, and I was suddenly different. I was suddenly British. I suddenly had an accent. I was suddenly foreign. I was suddenly, different than the people I grew
And
up with.
some
in a
people
small
are
town.
not good being different. Some people sort of like to fly under the radar.
For me, it was I had to go through some extreme speech therapy when I was a kid in North Wales, and I was in such a wonderful position where all of the kids I was growing up with just accepted me for who I was. My parents did a great deal of normalizing; they really normalized it for me, and the school did as well. It was just a normal part of my life, and it was just I was just me. When I came over here, suddenly I had everything that was different, and that difference just continued to happen. I came out as gay, I came out as pagan, all of these different things, right? But that piece around suddenly coming over here into a completely different new space, and also not ever going back. Like my parents never decided to go back on holiday. Caused me to not only have like be bullied and have a negative experience, but it created in me a really difficult relationship with change and control. I didn't have any control in coming over here. And so when I track back and look at my spiritual development, a lot of my spirituality is neo-paganism, connection with folklore, right? Anything to do with the United Kingdom makes total sense because I was trying to get that sense of home. And then with the ancestral piece, when I started to work with the ancestors and really focus in on those stories again, I realized that I don't have any ancestors in North America. I've been trying to find ancestors in North America through various affinity ancestors and conceptual ancestors, and I talk about those in the book too. But my ancestors are all in the UK, and my story is all in the UK. And so I never developed a story in Canada. And that caused me a great amount of anger and issue and resentment and bitterness. And I only really let that go in the past couple of years. And as soon as I clicked, as soon as I understood what and kind of the healing journey all came to a culmination, and I could feel the weight just lift. And I realized that I had been living in the past for a very, 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 very long time. And that's why I say ancestor work is not about living in the past. It's not about the ancestors' stories. It's about your story now and the legacy and the future. And that was big, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a big story and a big thing that most people go through their lives. Many people go through
Not
their
coming to
lives
realize.
and not coming to realize that takes a great deal
Yeah.
of self-awareness. And that is the most important thing about this. Like, I just want to keep saying, I don't see this as being a book about ancestors. I see it, I mean, because they're a very important part, but
Yeah.
it's about us. This book is about
Yeah.
us and the way we look at things and the way we grow and the way we need to look at things in context. Because as a reader and a Sir Walter Scott fan, I am so excited. There's
He's great.
not really that many that I've run into. And so, you know,
If you
in
go
my
to the UK, you'll be surrounded by them.
Okay. Well, I would love to, but no one's buying me a ticket. That's not happening right now. But I keep getting sidetracked with you. And I'm umming more in this show than okay. So going back, as like with books, that's where it came from. Books. We complain about a book that may be very advanced for that time, may have been telling people this is what you need to think about and do. But because certain words or whatever are used, we discredit it because we don't understand the context of the book.
Don't understand it.
We don't understand the times. We don't understand. And that is a great deal of a problem with relationships, is we don't understand the times. We don't understand. And that's a big you know, when you say people just want to live and they're not connecting, that is a big thing about it. So by doing this, we're also looking into history because we want to understand what those, like I say, I never met my great uncles or some greatness there. That worked on the canal, but I know through story that they existed. And what was it like to come over from Ireland and do that? You know, what was the world like at that time? That's another thing. Tamara, I'm going to put this up quickly. I love you, Tamara, but I only have so much time to talk today. And it didn't
Thank you for that comment, Tamara. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, but Tamara says that she's sorry that this happened to Ben, and that is disconnection and isolation. And yes, thank you, Tamara. Tamara is very sensitive. Okay, but I still need to hide you away, however lovely you are, Tamara. All right, so that is the context, the knowing, the understanding, and that we can only speak to them in terms that they would understand, in the spirituality that they would understand. So you have two different ways of connecting with your ancestors.
Yeah, so I think this is also a cultural thing. This is where the cultural piece comes in. So ancestor work, or how we conceptualize ancestors, is often very culturally based. In the West, we tend to focus mostly on our pedigree ancestors, which is our blood relatives. And that creates issues, and that creates obstacles for people who are coming into new spiritualities where they don't feel necessarily connected to ancestors of blood because they are still connected to those previous. I'm speaking particularly about Christianity, neo-pagans, which is whatever the new religion happens to be. If leaving that comes from a place of trauma and comes from a place of pain, that can create a lot of issues then with ancestors and working with ancestors, thinking of ancestral story. People who are dealing with family stories where there's abuse, where there's trauma, where there's pain, all of these things, and most families have those. Speaking from a therapist side now, most families have those. Most families do a lot to hide those things, though. So what happens is we're relating to our ancestors through story, but that story is heavily edited by the time it gets to us. Right. And so then what can often happen is you get stories of the black sheep, you get the stories of the legends, you get stories that make the family system continue to function and continue to enjoy its existence, right, as it is. So I feel like this is where then it starts to become a place of inner work, because what ancestor veneration can do and often does, is from multiple contexts here. It allows us to then start to look through and pierce the story we've been handed and start to relate to those individuals ourselves. It also expands the concept of ancestor, because if we only see ancestor as ancestry by blood, and we're dealing with all of that trauma and pain and all of that and that side, then we've locked ourselves out. I've come to a place where I start to see ancestor as being anybody or anything that has contributed to who I am. And particularly the queer individuals, somebody of the queer community and pagan community and all of this, the idea of affinity ancestors, lineage ancestors, family by choice is a big part of our culture, like our subculture. And a lot of people who come from a Western background, they get unsure of, like, how do you honor these individuals who've become big for us in our lives? Because all of our grief traditions, our religious spiritual traditions, are geared towards family, like blood family. So ancestor work really expands that. And if we take that one step further, then, if we see it through that lens of relationship, and the relationship is the relationship of anything that has contributed to who we are and growth as individual, then we can start to relate to non-traditional ancestors in a very similar way. There is no different, especially if we're looking at it from a story point of view. If you're relating to your bloody relatives through the story you've been handed, and that story is contributing to who you are, what is the difference between your relationship to that story and the story of a politician or a legendary hero in our society, right? Or a major part of your professional work, right? For nurses, it could be Florence Nightingale and that legendary character that's come up. If we then take that one step further, then what is the difference between our relationship to a fictional character and who has contributed to who and inspired our growth as an individual, and the story of a blood ancestor? There's no difference. The only difference is one existed and one exists in a different way, right? So I really take a great joy in that. In which case, then, ancestor work is expansive, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because I was and you all the time I was reading it. So, and I was thinking of different things.
Pointed out, right?
Yes. Because, well, I mean, there are different people come in different models. So some people work best with that real, I can touch it. Yes. That's family. No, I'm not going to say no thinking, but okay, then we're going to side, which is obviously the side I'm on, where you see it through story and spirit and the imagination, and all of those things are so whatever way is going to appeal more to you, and you give many different ways, so regardless of who you are as a person. But it does make a difference. Just a little anecdote here, because you have me full of them. There's a gentleman that ran a kid show that was very important to me when I grew up. It was color, it was rock music, it was all the things that out in the rural Ontario I was not getting. And we only had 3 stations at the time. And so I met him and I was able to say thank you. And then I helped him at Comic Cons. And I was there talking to a line of people who he had affected as well. Mom and dad were going through a divorce, but I could just go watch this show. Mom had to go off to work, but my sister and I would just watch the show and know it was time to go to school then. Yeah. It almost brings the world together through these characters, through these imaginary things, and listening to the stories of how it affected them. Like, I'm getting a cold chill here, and I wanted to invite everybody out for dinner because I'm the table person, but because you felt so close to them because the same thing. So yeah, I definitely see how imaginary characters, all these people, can make a difference, and how it almost creates a family of those who
It totally
Do
does.
that.
And this helps to explain then why tourism connected to fictional characters is so powerful. This is the reason why so many Japanese people coming over to PEI love going and doing
Yeah.
the Anne of Green Gables tour because, and there's a very specific reason for that, Anne of Green Gables was used as the teaching book for English in the 90s for Japanese students. So a lot of young Japanese or older Japanese people have a real connection to Lucy Lord Montgomery and Anne of Green Gables because they learned English through it. There's that connection. So then when they go to PEI and they're going around these places, suddenly they're in the story, right? In the same way why people go to England and Wales and they go around to all the castles to the places where King Arthur was connected to, right?
There are King Arthur tours on and Sherwood Forest. I'm a Robin Hood person.
Sherwood Forest. Iceland, the same thing. You can go and do the saga tour where you can walk around the landscape and go to very specific places that appear in the Icelandic sagas. And what does that do? That then removes the fictional imaginary element and it inserts you into a shared space with those characters. At any moment, you might turn around and there'll be a troll. At any moment, you might turn around and there's, Mr. Darcy of Bennett, right? It's all of these things. And so that I think that shared space then becomes that way of communicating and that relationship builds,
Yeah, no.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, for God's sakes, no. I mean, I'm thinking so hard right now. My hair is getting in my face. It's a
keep my hair short, so I don't have that deal.
I've never had this deal before, but that's just my brain going. I mean, I'm quite enjoying this. And this is where you bring up the entire, when you talk about standing there and this person could almost show up or that person on the land. And we talk about, bringing sand that was there. I know when I get into very historical places that are like ancient, we don't have, I will stand there and think, somebody stood here like so many hundreds of years or whatever ago. And this is what they did. They actually lived. And it makes you feel so small in a good way. I like to feel small. I like to not be responsible for everything around me, right? Like the world goes on and it humbles you that, your story is not so big. It's not so important. These people live.
Your story is linked to other stories. And together you form the bigger, the web, right?
That's right. So that is such an important, that rock, that piece of soil. I have rocks that other people are thinking you have, you're somewhat of a minimalist. Why do you have all these rocks? I mean, they're meaningful rocks. Okay.
Well, we can contextualize this in a different way, right? Those rocks are like the tablecloth that you have and the lemon pie and the coffee in that very particular coffee canister, right? Those rocks link you with that place, and because it's a physical part of the landscape, it creates that relationship, right? It's why so many people love to pick up souvenirs from places, because that souvenir becomes that touchstone to that place and that experience. And the way our memories and our brains work, we're symbolic associative beings, and so we tend to like to have things to associate, even if those things are representational. Same with pictures. Why people love having, used to love having photo albums. That's swinging the other way now socially. A lot of younger people are actually printing out pictures again, which is kind of cool. But it's that tangibility, right?
I mean, and that's almost a nostalgia. Every time a couple of generations go by with something, it goes back. I was a big Humphrey Bogart fan, when I was younger, because his world was black and white. There was good and bad, but he was the gray, right? Not good, not bad.
And with David Bowie is the same thing.
Yes. I was just listening to Heroes the other day because I love that song and everything that happened because of it. So So it is important to have those things. It is important to have those reminders, and they bring us home, and brought home to you in so many ways, and that you found, even though you were hurting at the time, you found some solace in these people. So these fictional people, these fictional characters, so they are important to you, and brought you
Exactly.
even closer to wanting to go back to where you were.
Those characters, some of those characters, yes. Other characters, I think, and I think if you ask most people, even just outside of like fictional book characters, fictional characters in general, right? There's something compelling, because what's going on, again, from the therapist side here, what's going on is a lot of stuff exists on the subconscious level for us. And so when we're dealing with things, or when we're existing and we're building and growing, right, parts of that come up from the subconscious and just below the conscious level. What we often do is we recognize in others things that are actually part of ourselves. This is why, the lady at the grocery store who isn't quick with bagging really irritates some of us, because we ourselves are worried that we'll be judged in the same way we're judging
Oh
her,
yeah,
right?
most definitely.
All these things, right? Or you might really admire something in your partner and just love that about them, when really it's you're recognizing in them something that you really love about yourself, but may not have actually been allowed to claim. That shadow piece coming up, right? So I think with fictional characters, what often happens is something resonates about the story, and we relate to them in that deep emotional way, because really it's our story, or parts of our story. And what's very interesting then is when you talk to people about their relationship throughout life, and I use this often in therapy work, we pick a particularly strong character for somebody. We talk about what's their relationship with that character throughout their life, and oftentimes, depending on where they're coming from, they may actually start to shift away from a particular character and look more at the villain, because the villain in that suddenly is their story. It's that whole like villain redemption arc, right? But it's fascinating then to see then what it is it's about developing understanding of our story, right?
Well, and strangely enough, because I am strange, I've tended to go the other way. Like, I was always the Phantom of the Opera, he's not really
Right.
bad, he's just misunderstood.
The
And then as you
outsider.
grow, as you grow, you realize sometimes they really are bad.
Right?
And you have to
get more
understand what
context.
you need. Right. You go towards the sun. Maybe that sunny guy wasn't such a wimp. He was taking her to safety. So there is, depending on the person, I will go towards that, or I will leave it. It is fictional. That's an entirely different show. Okay, so how many shows are you coming back for?
Right? But to illustrate what we were saying about, because that's a very good connecting point. You grow up in a family where the story of the family is this ancestor was great and amazing, could do no
Right.
wrong. As you grow and develop and understand the world in a different way. I had a podcast interview a few weeks ago with somebody who one of their ancestors was on the Mayflower, good Puritan stock, right? And as he got into his family story, he realized that the family story that this ancestor was, we should be really proud of this individual, was great, that was actually a slave owner. Oh, well, how am I going to now work with this individual? Because I that's part of my story I'm not interested in working with, right? Changes, focus.
That is the point. The point is, when we look back and when we find those connections, we're not doing it out of pride. This is the problem. Why should I be proud of something that somebody several generations ago did?
To be proud of.
Yeah. So you were told to be proud of this person. So why should you, when you didn't do that? Like, I don't understand that connection. That has nothing to do with me. I have always been more turned towards, my grandmother raised 5 kids during the Depression by herself. This is what I call heroism. Okay.
Right.
Not, and then, but there's all that. There's poverty shaming. Then there's all of these things. But not that big guy living in the big house.
Right.
That had free labor. right? That built it on somebody else's sweat. And so that is what some of the problem with this is that need to take pride and only we are of a better stock. There's, my gosh, Ben, we're going way back to to I have better genes in primitive times, like the strongest.
But that's again that key piece about how story and how we're relating story in the now. This is why ancestor work isn't about the past, it's about the now, because when you look at kind of all these ancestral genealogy programs and genealogy websites, what is the primary message that they're sending people as to why to do genealogical research? It's to find out who you are, find out your story, all of these things, right? Now, on one level, that is very true, because the context of the ancestors creates the context that we exist in now. And that's where a responsibility piece comes in, and a lot of people in North America and other parts of the world are having difficulty with that, because it's, well, what do we take responsibility of? But that's a whole other conversation. But that other piece around the idea that, there are, like for you, for example, right? You identify with your great-grandmother or grandmother?
No, grandmother.
Grandmother. You identify with the strength that she needed to have to raise 5 kids in the Depression by herself. That's huge. There's something about that then that resonates with you. That's a connecting point. But that's in you too, because you're of a context that she's created by doing that in the past, right?
Yeah, no, and that is the strength is what I was missing with those morning coffees. Not that coffee doesn't give me strength, but it is those individuals.
It doesn't give you wings, that's for sure.
It is those individuals that I connect most with, because you need that in life to get by, right?
Absolutely.
That is because so many people steer away from that. Like, why would you think about that? That's depressing. That's sad. And I'm like, no, that speaks of the human condition and the ability to rise above.
It does. It does.
So this is what this book does, and it really makes you think about all of this. It could alleviate shaming, because there is so much that people, and they look back at their past and they feel ashamed of what you didn't do that, but it will explain why. I mean, because there are things that have came up that I didn't know until after I had kids. I mean, it wasn't big. I guess other people knew. I was just off.
Well, there's that shame piece, though, right? There's the shame piece, just in a different format, right? You're shaming yourself for not knowing. But if you're in a system that is not going to let you know, and you have to find that out by yourself. And this is what family systems do. I keep talking about family systems. Family systems is that is that idea that, your family creates social rules and a culture that you then are born into that then really impacts then how you see the world. There are healthy and unhealthy social family systems in that way. The unhealthy family systems are the families that we see all the time in society, which are, don't talk to outsiders, oh, I don't like her, she's too wild, all of these things, right? Like, very controlled. And those are the ones that will instill shame. So there's the shame. We're a very shaming culture.
Oh, it's just, it's not guilt. People have been going around saying, I feel so guilty. No, you're not feeling guilty. You're being shamed. And we do that to ourselves. I'm not blaming anybody else. We open ourselves up to it. Totally. So when we talk about family, this is important. You're not saying that family is horrible. You're saying family is a great thing. Go get to know them better, even several generations back, because this is going to change your life.
Yeah.
But you talk about, when we talk about doing any kind of work like this and the protection needed or whatever, you said, from what you understand, the other ancestors will take out anybody that's going to give you a hard time.
That's another piece too, right? Yeah, from a more spiritual, kind of more neo-pagan bent, right, or like the spiritual sense. When you look around the world. And this is one of the big questions that is always raised. How do I work with an ancestor that is, could have been a child molester, could have been an abusive person, could have been a murderer, whatever. All of these really negative things. How do I work with them? So in a lot of the traditions that I've studied, and there's a lot of examples of traditions I don't belong to, but I try to get an insider perspective to. all of these traditions have within their ancestral veneration practices systems where the entire collective of the ancestors becomes a force, right? And so individuals, there's a long-standing spiritual understanding that those lower level spirits often are the ones that have the potential to become monstrous. Those individuals who just can't deal with the fact that they've died, or they can't deal with the fact that they've died violent death. So what do? They haunt places. They become monsters, right? A lot of ghost stories are ghosts connected to really violent deaths or really notorious individuals. Yes. Right? So what happens in ancestral spiritual traditions is there's this understanding of the collective. Because we tend to think of ancestry as being our individual lines going back. When you get back so many levels, I think it's something I counted the other day. When you get back 12 generations, you have something like over 1 million individual ancestors, right? Now, that's a huge number. That doesn't make any sense when you actually go back further than that, because you're going to get quadrillions of ancestors eventually, more ancestors than you can possibly have had, because the population of humans at the time didn't exist that way. So what happens is you get this breakdown where individuals then start to appear multiple times. You are actually your own third cousin twice removed 7 generations back, right? So on and so on and so on. So what happens then is ancestry becomes the collective community story. And then what happens in ancestral traditions then is that figureheads, usually the heads of the family or the founders of the family, become then the kind of central nexus for all of the other ancestors. And that collective then can weigh down on those really negative individuals who potentially pose a risk to the lineage and the line and to society. Those individuals who would come back and haunt. Because they can't get onto grips with the fact that they've died, right? It's a very spiritual kind of way of looking at it. But when you look cross-culturally, a lot of these traditions have that built in,
Well, and you know what? Sometimes one person's folklore is another person's spirituality, and back and forth. And to me, story is in itself is a spirituality. I mean, yeah. we would read Lord of the Rings or whatever and discuss it. This was our thing. So just so what you say in the book, and I can't remember if I quote it right, is that family protects family, even from family. And people that could deal very well with the living as well. And there's also something else that I think you said about the difference between privacy and secrecy. And I think that's an important thing, even in today with social media, with young people, like older people, just people sharing way too much than they should for their own good. So what was the exact line on that, Ben? Do you remember what?
So that piece, I would say, so privacy and secrecy in brief, it comes back to that piece about shame, right? And if you think about your own family context and the rules of your own families, you know when you've overstepped and broken a family rule, because suddenly you'll feel shame. So the real work there is understanding then that whenever you feel like you need to keep something secret, that's shame. Whenever you feel like you can keep something private, that's empowerment, because you have discernment then. You have the power to say, okay, I'm going to keep this to myself because they don't need to know that, versus I need to keep this to myself because I'm going to be a bad person
if I don't.
Exactly.
And that is the whole thing, that death is used as a punishment as well.
Yes.
For people.
So.
I mean, it's
social death particularly.
Oh gosh, yes. People can kill. I mean, people can kill people socially by just going out there and shooting off about a lot of things that aren't true. And I mean, that is attacking a livelihood now, with so many people making their living on social media or whatever. What, like you were speaking about a certain interview and how the questions went in that direction about an individual, and it's just not good, people. So think before you talk. You don't always have to read a book before you invite the author onto your show. You may want to. No, this is the only time I'm doing this. You can never be sure. My aunt was in my corner, so we know why that was now. So,
well, I think you also added me to Facebook too, so you saw a lot of me oversharing my secret private things. So.
No, they're not. They're in the book. They're not. They're not secret, private. I mean, this is the point. How much do you put out there to make people realize that it is workable? And that it doesn't make a difference. And as I say, I've spoken to another author about that, because you're putting the personal in the book. I say I learn from people's experiences. Like, I'm very pragmatic. Don't give me all this song and dance and not show me how it works. I mean, that's I want to see it. So I think it's important to do that. And I thought it was important for me to share, so you could see that you're making a difference.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, writing is a very long process, and you sit there thinking, is anyone ever really going to care?
2.5 years. It's a long process. 2.5 effing years.
Yeah, no. And so out September 8th. From what I can make out on Amazon.
So, weirdly, actually, they're starting to make their way out in the world now. So officially, I think they're being released on Amazon on the 8th, but I think that was just one of those numbers. So look out. You can pre-order it now, and it'll be out sometime in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's worth it. I think this is definitely a worth it book. And so, Ben, I will say thank you tomorrow. I will send you certain links just so you can see. Not that you have to. I'm expecting you to share, and I have to do this now because we forgot to talk about it before the show, and you're going to disappear before I go away. And then one day we will sit down with a big graph and decide all the times you're going to come back to Fika. Okay.
All the time. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody in the comment section. We appreciate you. And for those of you who are watching on my own wall, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ben. Most definitely. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Well, let's look at my hair has actually gone. When has this happened before? It's all over the place, and it's getting in my way. So it is definitely time to say goodbye here at Fika. As always, until the next time, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone.